Red Arizona dust rose in clouds behind the navy blue Kenworth as Jake Morrison drove his truck along Interstate 40 toward Flagstaff. The midday sun turned the desert into a furnace, and the truck's air conditioning battled the relentless June heat. Jake adjusted his faded Diamondback's cap and took a sip of lukewarm coffee from the thermos beside him. At 52, Jake knew those roads like the back of his hand. 28 years behind the wheel, hauling everything from lumber to electronics, crisscrossing the country from coast to coast. But in the last 3 years, since Sarah had passed away, the roads had become more than just his job. They were his refuge, his escape from the empty house in Tucson that still smelled of her perfume, still echoed with her laughter. He would run his hand over the wedding ring he insisted on wearing, a habit Sarah had always found comforting. She used to say that ring was like a lighthouse, always reminding him of the way back home. Now, home was just an abstract concept, an address where he kept his things between trips. The road stretched ahead, a grey ribbon cutting through the ochre and terracotta-painted desert. Saguaro cacti stood like solitary sentinels, and the horizon trembled with the mirage of heat. Jake was thinking of stopping at the next gas station to refuel when he noticed something strange on the side of the road, about 200 meters ahead. A car, a red sedan, seemingly abandoned, half hidden behind a rock formation, about 20 meters from the road. The hood was open, like a gaping mouth begging for help. Jake frowned. It wasn't uncommon to find broken-down vehicles in that area, but something about the scene bothered him. Maybe it was the open driver's door swaying slightly in the wind, or maybe it was just his intuition, that sixth sense that experienced drivers develop after so many years on the road. He began to slow down, the truck's enormous brakes hissing softly. Sarah always said he had too big a heart for his own good, always stopping to help strangers, always the good Samaritan. "One day you're going to get into trouble with this habit of saving everyone," she used to joke, but her eyes shone with pride when she said it. Jake pulled the truck over to the side of the road, turned on the hazard lights, and turned off the engine. The silence of the desert enveloped him immediately, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the whistling wind blowing between the rocks. He grabbed his water bottle, put his cap firmly on his head, and climbed out of the cab. The heat hit him like a punch. It must have been around 42 degrees, easily. He walked towards the abandoned car, his eyes scanning the area. Footprints in the dust, leading from the car towards a cluster of rocks and bushes further on. Small footprints, probably those of a woman or a young person. "Hello?" Jake called, his hoarse voice echoing in the void. "Does anyone need help?" Only the wind answered, whistling through the stones. He approached the car and peered inside. Empty seats, a bag thrown on the passenger seat, a folded map on the dashboard. The keys were still in the ignition. He tried to start it, but the engine only groaned lazily. Dead battery or overheating, probably. Jake followed the footprints, growing increasingly worried. Whoever had gotten out of that car shouldn't be wandering through the desert on a day like this. Dehydration could kill in a few hours in that heat. He rounded a large, rust-colored rock and stopped abruptly. There, about 10 meters away, lay a young woman. She was lying on the ground, motionless, her long brown hair spread around her head like a dark halo. She was wearing jeans and a white blouse now stained with dust. But it wasn't the young woman who made Jake's heart race and his blood run cold. It was a cobra, a gigantic western rattlesnake. It had to be at least 6 feet long, with the thickness of an adult man's arm. The snake was partially coiled around the young woman's left leg, and its muscular body slowly rose, probing, its forked tongue moving in and out of its mouth in rapid motions. The rattle at the tip of its tail vibrated with a low, menacing sound that made the hairs on the back of Jake's neck stand on end. Jake stood paralyzed for a moment, his brain processing the surreal scene before him. The young woman was unconscious, likely from sunstroke or dehydration. And that monstrous snake was literally crawling up her body, its jaws opening and closing experimentally. Jake knew enough about snakes to know that rattlesnakes of that size could, theoretically, attempt to swallow large prey, although it was extremely rare. But in desperate situations, in the desert heat, abnormal behaviors did occur. There was no time to think. Every second counted. Jake frantically looked around, searching for something, anything he could use as a weapon. His eyes landed on a fallen branch from a dry bush, about 5 meters away. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. He moved slowly, very slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements that might alert the snake or cause it to attack the young woman. His heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was going to burst. His hands trembled as he slowly bent down to pick up the branch. It was heavier than it looked, about 2 meters long, with a relatively thick and solid tip. Perfect. He approached the scene like a hunter closing in on his prey, each step calculated, each movement controlled. The snake continued its investigation of the young woman, seemingly more interested than threatened by his presence. The rattle continued its constant warning, a sound that made Jake's blood pulse in his temples. When he was about 3 meters away, Jake stopped. He had to get this right. One wrong move, and the snake could bite the young woman, injecting enough venom to kill her in minutes. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the branch in his hands, calculating the arc of the strike. "Sorry, girl," he murmured to the snake, knowing that what he was about to do went against all his instincts to respect wildlife. But there was no choice. It was the snake's life, or the young woman's life, and Jake had already made his choice. He lunged forward in an explosive motion, bringing the branch down in a powerful arc. The thick end struck the snake just behind its head, smashing it against the sandy ground with a dull thud. The serpent writhed violently, its body contorting in spasms, its rattle vibrating furiously. Jake gripped the branch firmly, pressing the snake's head against the ground, while using his boot to begin uncoiling the snake's body from the young woman's leg. The snake struggled with surprising force, its thick body coiling around his leg, trying to find something to cling to. Jake felt the reptile's powerful muscles contracting against his calf, but he maintained his grip on the branch, not letting its head detach. With his foot free, he continued uncoiling the snake, pushing it away from the young woman. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, the snake was completely separated from the girl. Jake kicked the convulsing body of the serpent away, still holding its head firmly pinned to the ground. The reptile struggled, but was rapidly losing strength. The blow had been devastating. Jake looked at the young woman. She hadn't moved during the entire confrontation, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant she hadn't agitated the snake. Bad because it meant her condition was serious. He needed to act fast. Releasing the branch and immobilizing the snake, Jake knelt beside the young woman. He placed 2 fingers on her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, weak but present, beating too rapidly. Her skin was dry and hot as fire to the touch. Advanced sunstroke, no doubt. He took his water bottle and gently turned her head to the side, dripping a little water onto her chapped lips. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "Stay with me. You'll be all right." He glanced around quickly, checking for more snakes or other dangers, then picked her up. She was light, very light, and Jake felt a pang of worry. How many hours had she been there, under that scorching sun, without water? He began walking back to the truck, his arms shielding the young woman from the sun. Each step seemed to take an eternity, and he could feel his own sweat running down his back, soaking his shirt. When he finally reached his Kenworth, he carefully opened the passenger door and placed her in the seat, adjusting the air conditioning to the maximum temperature. Jake picked up his cell phone and checked the signal. A faint bar, but it was there. He dialed 911. Emergency, what is your situation? The operator's voice sounded clear on the line. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm on Interstate 40, approximately at kilometer marker 213, heading east. I found a young woman unconscious in the desert, likely suffering from severe heat stroke. She needs urgent medical attention. Understood, Mr. Morrison. We are sending an ambulance to your location. Can you describe her condition? Jake placed his hand on the young woman's forehead again. Hot, dry skin, rapid pulse, unresponsive to stimuli. I don't know how long she's been in the sun, but I found her car abandoned. I'm giving her water and cooling her down with air conditioning now. Excellent. Keep doing that. The ambulance should arrive in approximately 20 minutes. Stay on the line with me. Jake spent the next 20 minutes alternating between wetting a cloth with water and placing it on the young woman's forehead and wrists, and taking small sips of water when her lips moved slightly. The operator stayed on the line, asking questions, offering guidance, keeping Jake focused. Slowly, very slowly, the young woman began to show signs of improvement. Her eyelids trembled. A small moan escaped her lips. Jake felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made him collapse. That's right, girl. That's it. You're safe now. Just keep breathing. When the ambulance finally arrived, its red and blue lights cutting through the desert, Jake felt his shoulders relax for the first time since he'd seen that abandoned car. Two paramedics jumped out of the vehicle carrying equipment and moving with practiced efficiency. Good afternoon. I'm Richard. And this is Jennifer. Are you Mr. Morrison? Asked the older paramedic, a black man with grey hair and kind eyes. Yes, I found her unconscious over there on those rocks, Jake pointed. There was a rattlesnake wrapped around her. I managed to get rid of it. She was like this when I found her, unconscious. Jennifer, a Latina woman in her 30s, was already checking the young woman's vital signs, placing an oximeter on her finger and checking her temperature with an ear thermometer. Body temperature of 40 degrees, low blood pressure, rapid pulse, definitely heat stroke, she quickly diagnosed, but her vital signs are stabilizing. You did an excellent job cooling her down, Mr. Morrison. They transferred the young woman to a stretcher, inserted an IV in her arm, and continued the cooling process with wet compresses. Jake watched, feeling strangely reluctant to let her go. It didn't make sense. He didn't even know the girl. But there was something about the act of saving her that had stirred something deep within him. You said there was a snake? Richard asked as he prepared the young woman for transport. A big rattlesnake. Very big. It was wrapped around her leg when I arrived. I had to attack it to get it away from the girl. Richard nodded gravely. You were lucky. Snakes that size can be deadly. Do you want us to call animal control? The snake is dead, Jake said simply. He didn't like having killed the creature, but he didn't regret it. Given the same circumstances, I would do it all again. Jennifer looked at him respectfully. You probably saved her life, Mr. Morrison. Another half hour in that sun, and she wouldn't have survived, and the snake could have bitten her at any moment. Jake simply nodded, not trusting his voice at the moment. He looked at the young woman on the stretcher, her eyes now half open, confused, but alive. Alive. Which hospital are you taking her to? He asked. Flagstaff Medical Center. It's the closest one with a good emergency unit. Jake hesitated, then asked, Can I visit her, just to make sure she's okay? Richard smiled. Of course. I'm sure she'll want to thank the man who saved her life. What's your phone number? We'll write it down in the report and give it to her when she's conscious enough. Jake gave his number, watching as they loaded the stretcher into the ambulance. Before they closed the doors, the young woman turned her head slightly toward him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was confusion there, but also something more. Recognition, perhaps. Gratitude. Then the doors closed and the ambulance drove off, its sirens piercing the desert silence. Jake stood there for a long moment, watching until the vehicle disappeared on the undulating horizon. Then he walked back to where he had left the snake. The reptile was motionless now, its body still partially coiled in a final defensive spasm. Jake knelt beside it, gently touching its glistening scales. "I'm sorry, old lady, but you were in the wrong place at the wrong time." He carefully picked her up by the body, away from her crushed head, and carried her further off the road, placing her in the shade of a large rock. It wasn't much, but it was the respect he could offer a creature that was simply following its instincts. Back in his truck, Jake started the engine and headed back onto the road. But something had changed. For the first time in 3 years since Sarah's death, he felt a purpose beyond simply existing, beyond just driving from place to place, killing time until time killed him. He had saved a life, and that mattered. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of miles and thoughts. Jake delivered his cargo to Flagstaff as planned, checked into a cheap motel near the highway, and took a long, hot shower that washed away the dust and sweat of the day. But he couldn't stop thinking about the young woman. How was she? What had led her to abandon the car and wander through the desert? Did she have family who would be worried about her? It was 8 o'clock at night when his phone rang. An unknown number. Jake answered hesitantly. "Hello? Mr. Morrison?" It was a young, still weak but clear female voice. "My name is Emily. Emily Sawyer. I think you saved my life today." Jake sat on the motel bed, his heart racing. "Emily, how are you feeling?" "Better. Much better, thanks to you." There was emotion in her voice, a tremor she was clearly trying to control. "The doctors said I was maybe 20 minutes away from permanent brain damage or worse when you found me, and that snake—" She shuddered audibly. "They said there was a giant snake." "There was," Jake confirmed, "but everything's fine now, you're safe." "I need to thank you in person. Could you come to the hospital tomorrow, please?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Sure. What time would be good for you?" "Any time. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." She tried to laugh, but it came out more like a sob. "Mr. Morrison, thank you. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for caring enough to check that car. Most people would have just driven right past." "Call me Jake, and there's no need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said softly. "No. They wouldn't have. But you did, and I will be eternally grateful for that." After they hung up, Jake sat in the dark motel room for a long time, staring at the ring on his finger. He could almost hear Sarah's voice, that affectionate but slightly exasperated tone she used when he did something reckless but noble. "You and your overly big heart," she would say, but she would be smiling. "I know, Sarah," he murmured to the empty room. "I know." The next morning, Jake drove to Flagstaff Medical Center, a bouquet of desert wildflowers in hand, bought from a street vendor. It seemed silly, perhaps, but he didn't know what else to bring. The hospital was large and modern, with bright white walls and gleaming floors that reflected the fluorescent lights. The receptionist directed him to room 312. He knocked gently on the door before entering. Emily was sitting on the bed, propped up on pillows, an IV still connected to her arm. She looked small and frail against the white hospital sheets, but her eyes were alert and bright when she saw him. "Jake," she said, and her whole face lit up with a smile. He was struck by the force of that reaction, by the sheer relief and joy in her expression. She couldn't have been more than 25, he realized, with those expressive brown eyes and dark hair that was now clean and tied in a loose ponytail. "Hi, Emily. How are you feeling?" "Like someone who was boiled alive and then resurrected," she said with a weak laugh. "But alive, so I'm not complaining." She looked at the flowers. "Are these for me?" "Yes, they are. Sorry, not very." "They're perfect." She picked them up, smelling the wildflowers. her eyes filling with tears. "They're absolutely perfect, thank you." Jake pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down. "So what happened out there, if you don't mind telling me?" Emily sighed, looking at the flowers in her lap. "I was driving from Los Angeles to Denver. Change, new job, new beginning, you know. It was going well until my car started overheating in the middle of nowhere. I pulled over, opened the hood, and the steam that came out was so thick I could barely see. I was waiting for it to cool down when I realized I'd left my phone in the car, and the battery was dead anyway." She paused, her fingers tightening around the bouquet. "It was so hot, Jake. So incredibly hot. I thought I saw a structure, maybe a house or a gas station, through the rocks, so I started walking towards it. But as I rounded the rocks, I realized it was just more desert. And then I started to feel dizzy. The last thing I remember is falling and thinking, what a stupid way to die." "You weren't stupid," Jake said firmly. "You were in an impossible situation. You did the best you could. I should have stayed in the car. I know that now. But I panicked." She looked at him, her eyes large and vulnerable. "The paramedics told me about the snake. They said it was huge and that it was wrapped around me when you arrived." Jake nodded. "It was big, very big. But you don't need to think about that now." "Did you kill her?" His voice was almost a whisper. "Yes, there was no other choice. I'm sorry. I know it's not ideal." "No," Emily interrupted, shaking her head vigorously. "Don't apologize. You saved my life. Twice. Once from the sun, once from the snake. You're my hero, Jake Morrison." Jake felt his face flush. He didn't see himself as a hero, just as a man who had done what was right. Anyone would have... "Stop," Emily said, her voice suddenly firm. "Stop downplaying what you did. I was out there for hours before you showed up. Hours. And do you know how many cars passed by? Dozens. I know because the paramedics said my car was visible from the road, and nobody stopped. Nobody except you." She reached out and took his hand, her small, warm fingers against his calloused palm. "You're special, Jake, and I need you to know that. You gave me a second chance at life, and I'm not going to waste it." Jake felt something break inside him, a dam he had built around his heart over the past 3 years. He squeezed her hand back, not trusting her voice to respond. They talked for hours. Emily told him about her life in Los Angeles, her boring job at a marketing company, her decision to quit everything and start over in Denver, where she had a college friend. Jake talked about his life on the road, the places he had seen, the people he had met. He spoke about Sarah for the first time in years and discovered that it didn't hurt as much as it used to. "She seems to have been a wonderful woman," Emily said softly. It was the best. She would be proud of you, you know, for what you did yesterday." Jake blinked rapidly, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. "I like to think so." A doctor came in, making his rounds, and Jake stood up to make room. "I should go. Let you rest." "Are you leaving? Flagstaff, I mean." There was urgency in Emily's voice. "Probably tomorrow. I have another shipment waiting in Phoenix." Can I have your number? I want to stay in touch if you don't mind." Jake smiled. "I would like that." They exchanged numbers, and when Jake turned to leave, Emily called his name. "Jake." He turned around. "Yes? Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For staying. For caring. Take care, Emily, and good luck in Denver." "You too, Jake. Drive safely." In the days and weeks that followed, Jake and Emily kept in touch. Text messages first, then occasional calls when their schedules allowed. Emily fully recovered and finally arrived in Denver, started her new job, and began building her new life. And with each message, each call, Jake felt something inside him begin to heal, something he was sure was permanently broken. A month after the incident, Jake was making a delivery in Denver. It was inevitable, he told himself. Denver was a big city, a common stop on his route. It had nothing to do with the fact that Emily lived there, nothing at all. But when he texted her to say he'd be in town, and Emily replied asking to meet for dinner, his heart skipped a beat in a way he hadn't felt in years. They met at a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of cozy place with low lighting and candles on the tables. Emily was waiting when he arrived, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. She stood up when she saw him, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other. Then she moved forward and hugged him, tightly and strongly, and Jake hugged her back, feeling something click into place inside him. "It's so good to see you," she murmured against his chest. "You too," he said, his voice hoarse. The dinner was perfect. They talked and laughed, shared stories and dreams, and for the first time in 3 years, Jake didn't feel like an empty shell simply drifting through life's movements. He felt alive, present, real. When the night ended and they were standing outside the restaurant, Emily took his hand. "I know this is crazy," she said, looking up at him in the soft light of the street lamps. "I know we barely know each other. I know you're probably just being kind because you saved me. But Jake, I like you. I really do, and I'd like to see where this could go, if you want, of course." Jake looked at that young woman, so brave and vulnerable, putting her heart on the line. He thought of Sarah, of their engagement ring, of the vow they had made so many years ago, and he thought of how Sarah always said that life was for the living, that loving didn't mean forgetting, but rather honoring the memory by continuing to live fully. Slowly, he took the wedding ring off his finger, gazing at it for a long moment in the light. Then he carefully placed it in his pocket, not discarding it, but giving it a new place, a place of memory, not of weight. "Emily," he said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "You are brave and beautiful and full of life, and I would very much like to see where this goes." When he kissed her under the Denver stars, Jake felt Sarah smile somewhere in the universe. And he knew it was okay, that it was time to move on, that saving her that day hadn't just been about giving Emily a second chance at life. It had been about giving it to him as well. Months turned into years. Jake adjusted his routes to pass through Denver more often. Emily flew to see him whenever she could. It was unconventional, certainly. The age difference raised a few eyebrows, but they didn't care. They had found each other in the most unlikely place, under the most extreme circumstances, and it had forged a bond that nothing could break. Eventually, Jake sold his house in Tucson. Eventually, he cut back on his hours on the road. Eventually, he moved to Denver, to a small apartment that he and Emily turned into a home. And sometimes, when they drove together along the same Arizona roads, passing the place where it had all begun, Jake would stop the car. They would walk to the rocks, to the exact spot where he had found her on that fateful day, and there, under the relentless desert sun, they would silently renew their gratitude for the second chance they had both been given. 2 years after the rescue, on a warm June morning that echoed that day in the desert, Jake woke up early. Emily was still asleep beside him, her hair spread across the pillow, her peaceful face in the soft morning light. He watched her for a moment, still marveling that this incredible woman had chosen to build a life with him. Silently, he got out of bed and went to the dresser. From the bottom of the top drawer, he took out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, with a modest diamond that had belonged to Sarah's mother. Before she died, Sarah had made Jake promise that if he ever found love again, he would wear his mother's ring. "She would love to know that she helped bring happiness, even after she's gone," Sarah had said. At the time, Jake had thought it impossible. He never imagined loving again. But life, he had learned, had a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Later that day, Jake rented a car and told Emily he wanted to take her for a ride. She agreed, intrigued by the mysterious glint in his eyes. They drove along Interstate 40, just as Jake had done that day 2 years earlier. "I know where we're going," Emily said softly as she recognized the area. "I know you know," Jake replied, squeezing her hand. He parked in the same spot where he had parked his truck. They walked side by side to the rocks, to the exact spot. Someone, perhaps a park ranger or a traveler who had heard the story, had placed a small wooden cross there, marking the place. It had words carved into it. "Miracles happen here." Emily touched the cross lightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I still have nightmares sometimes," she admitted, "about the heat, about the feeling of fainting, about waking up in the hospital not knowing if it was real or if I had died and was in some kind of purgatory." "But you wake up," Jake said, wrapping her in his arms, "and you're here, alive, real, with me." "With you," she repeated, turning in his arms to look at him. "My unlikely hero, my trucker in rusty armor." Jake laughed, but there was nervousness in his laughter now. He took her hands in his, looking deeply into her brown eyes that he had come to love so much. "Emily, that day when I met you here, I was merely existing, not living, just driving through life, hoping to eventually reach some final destination. I had given up on happiness, on purpose, on everything that made life worthwhile." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "But then I saw you, and something inside me, something I thought was dead, woke up. Saving you wasn't just about giving you a second chance, Emily. It was about giving myself one too. You brought me back to life as much as I brought you back." Emily was crying now, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Jake." He knelt down, right there in the red Arizona dust, in the place where their lives had intertwined so dramatically. He took the box from his pocket and opened it, revealing the ring that gleamed in the sunlight. "Emily Sawyer, you gave me hope when I was sure I'd never feel it again. You gave me joy when I was sinking in sadness. You gave me love when my heart was frozen. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, not despite how we met, but because of it? Because that horrible day brought us the greatest gift we could have asked for, each other." Emily was sobbing now, shaking her head furiously before she could even form words. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes!" Jake slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. He stood up and kissed her, deeply, passionately, right there in the place where he had almost lost her before he even met her. When they finally parted, Emily looked at the ring on her finger, then at Jake, then at the desert around them. "You know what's funny?" she said, laughing through her tears. "I used to be afraid of this place, nightmares about it. But now it's the most important place in the world to me. It's where my life really began." "Our life," Jake corrected. "It's where our life began." The wedding was small and intimate, held 6 months later in a garden in Denver, with close friends and family. Emily wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Jake wore his best suit, which still smelled faintly of mothballs from being stored for so long. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way they looked at each other, the way their hands fit together perfectly, the way their vows resonated with the profound truth of two people who had found each other against all odds. Jake kept his promise to Sarah, using his mother's ring to begin this new chapter. And that night, in his hotel room, he felt Sarah's approval as a warm and comforting presence. She would have loved Emily, he knew. She would have approved of this new happiness. The years that followed were the happiest of Jake's life. He finally retired completely from the road at 58, accepting a job at a local logistics company that allowed him to be home every night. Emily thrived in her career, eventually opening her own small marketing agency. They bought a house, adopted a dog, and planted a garden. And when Emily discovered she was pregnant at 29, Jake cried tears of joy for the first time since Sarah's death. He had thought he would never be a father, that ship had sailed, but once again life had given him an unexpected gift. Their daughter was born on a clear spring morning with healthy lungs and a strong cry that filled the delivery room. They named her Sarah Hope Morrison. Sarah, in honor of the woman Jake loved first. Hope, because that was exactly what that day in the desert had given them both. When Jake held his daughter for the first time, gazing into that tiny, perfect face, he reflected on how strange and wonderful life was. How a moment of decision, the choice to stop and check on an abandoned car, had led to all of this. It had led to love, to family, to happiness he never thought he would have again. 5 years later, the Morrison family returned to Arizona. Little Sarah Hope, now a vibrant 4-year-old with her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn smile, jumped excitedly as they drove along Interstate 40. "Is this it, Dad? Is this where you saved Mom from the dragon?" Jake and Emily exchanged smiles. Sarah had heard the story so many times that it had taken on mythical proportions in her young mind. The snake had become a dragon, the desert a magical kingdom, and Jake a valiant knight. "It wasn't exactly a dragon, sweetie," Emily said gently. "It was a snake, a very large and scary snake." "But Dad was brave, right? Like a knight?" "Yes," Emily said, looking at Jake with love in her eyes. "He was exactly like a knight." They stopped at the same spot, walked to the same stones. The wooden cross was still there, weathered by time and weather, but still standing. Someone had added dried flowers over the years, and there was a small sign now, placed by the Parks Department, warning travelers about the dangers of exposure to the desert heat. Jake picked Sarah Hope up, pointing to the spot. "It was there, sweetheart. It was there that I found your mother. And you saved her and they lived happily ever after," Sarah declared with the absolute certainty of a 4-year-old. Jake looked at Emily over his daughter's head, seeing their own future reflected in her eyes. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was imperfect and messy and sometimes difficult. But it was theirs. "Yes, sweetie," he said softly. "That's exactly what we did." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange, pink, and purple, the Morrison family stood together in that sacred place. Jake had one arm around Emily, his other hand holding Sarah Hope, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely whole. The Arizona desert had taken much from them. It had been the scene of so many travelers' deaths over the years, a relentless and merciless place. But for Jake and Emily, it had been a place of rebirth, the place where two strangers had become each other's saviors, the place where the end had become a beginning. As they drove back to Denver that night, with Sarah Hope asleep in the back seat, Emily took Jake's hand and held it tightly. "Do you know what I love about our story?" she said softly. "What?" "It's not about you saving me. It's about us saving each other. You saved me from that horrible day in the desert, but I saved you from loneliness, from grief, from merely existing without truly living. We saved each other, Jake. Together." Jake squeezed her hand back, his wedding ring gleaming softly in the dashboard light. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." And as they drove through the night, toward home, toward the future, Jake Morrison finally understood what Sarah had meant all those years ago when she said that their wedding ring was like a lighthouse, always guiding him home. Home wasn't a place. Home was the people you loved. And he had found his home again, unexpectedly, in the most unlikely place, in the most extraordinary way. Some people would go through life without experiencing the kind of love Jake had with Sarah. He was lucky enough to experience it twice, and this time, with Emily and little Sarah Hope by his side, he had no intention of wasting a single precious moment. The road stretched out ahead, just as it always did. But this time Jake wasn't driving alone through the darkness. He was going home. And that made all the difference.